Thank you, Paul, for the introduction, and good morning, everyone. It's really nice to be here. My name is Stefan Elrington, and I lead the partnerships and alliances for IBM Quantum with startups, and that's across our research, development, as well as the go-to-market work that we do with startups. And yesterday, you heard from Aparna Prabhakar, where she spoke about IBM Quantum's path to quantum advantage. Today, however, I'm going to speak about that path to quantum advantage and how that's actually accelerated by our startup partners and the ecosystem. So I'll do that by really talking about 4 key points that I'll bring up in the presentation. But before we do so, let's go ahead and just set the stage here. Let's contextualize the importance of the startup to the entire quantum computing ecosystem. So in terms of the significance, there is a lot of potential in quantum computing, which you've heard many times before, and this is the reason why you're here today. And in 2026, for example, we expect to see around a $5 to $13 billion opportunity in quantum, which is not a very far outlook, as it's only 4 years away. And our friends from Boston Consulting Group, they did some of these analytics, and they've said that, in terms of thinking about the key drivers that are actually driving the increase and the size of our market, there are 4 things to think about. One is actually there is an increase in the broader understanding of quantum algorithms. 2, there also are technical achievements that are being made in this field in terms of the quality and the approach. The third thing is that there's actually a growth in really community-led quantum contributions. So that's an increase in adoption. And the fourth thing is actually really important, where there's a rise in the investments in quantum tech. So that's also thinking about the capital that's going behind and really driving some of this research and development that's happening. In terms of double-clicking into some of those drivers from an investment point of view, really, there are a lot of deals happening in the quantum computing industry today. So Tenin Sun had spoken a little bit about some of the mergers and acquisitions that have been happening within quantum as it relates to the vertical integration. And there's just a lot of deal flow, and some of this is actually driven by key industry investors, and a lot of you are actually here in this room today. The second thing is that when you look from an IP perspective and just see the amounts of patents that are coming out that are related to quantum, that's also a sizable contribution to the industry. So these are key indicators of growth, future growth, and sustained growth. And without going into too much details, but thinking about some of the investors here in the field, it's really driven by, by 3 key investors. So they are the venture capital firms. We also have these startup accelerators that are seeing significant deal flow, and of course, the government as well. And this breakdown is actually done by the number of deals, not necessarily the size of deals, because there is significant government investments as well. So, and in addition to that, we have some of the key players in this, investing in quantum technology. So when we think about that, we really are setting the stage for sustained growth, and especially as it relates to some of the startups and the companies that are coming out in the quantum computing industry. And in my role, I really have the pleasure to interact with a lot of these companies that are in quantum computing, that are trying to push the boundaries towards quantum advantage. And I want to argue here that they, in fact, help to accelerate not just IBM's, but the entire industry towards quantum advantage. And this is because they really demonstrate value. As they're bringing value add to the stack, they're coming up with many different solutions as it relates to hardware, as it relates to the software, and as it relates to really meeting the end users and the industry together. So at IBM, startups are really core to our IBM Quantum program. And we work with a growing number of startup partners who are demonstrating value. There are some of these logos of startup partners that we work with that's put up on the screen here to your left. And a lot of them are here today. You're going to hear some really good talks as well from those partners. And the idea here is to really grow the ecosystem and be able to bring value to the end users. And how do they fit in to the broader IBM Quantum ecosystem? Well, you've heard before that there are approximately 250 startups in quantum computing. At IBM, we manage a startup program in which we have around 40 startups, and we're working really deeply with them to help to accelerate their research and development, help them to think through their use cases as well as commercial go-to-market. And they are a valued member of our broader IBM Quantum network that has around 180 plus members. So the startups which take up 40 members, they really are a significant size of the total IBM Quantum network program. So the question here is not, when will we get there towards quantum advantage? At this point, I hope that all of us in the room, we know that that's where we will get there. There's no doubt about that. So I want to shift the question not to when, but actually to how we will get there. And we look to partnerships really to help us reach there, as well as to help us reach there faster. So at IBM, we want to charter a path where we can reach that together with the startups. And how do we do that? Well, you've seen this graph before. This is, the famous roadmap that shows, the way that IBM is thinking about its quantum services from now all the way into 2026 and further. And, in this roadmap, we really want to just charter and just make the framework for, having, what we plan to do in terms of the software stack, as well as what we are planning to do in terms of the hardware stack. And the argument here is that, startups that are in this quantum ecosystem, they have a role to play in both hardware and software. Now, let me spend some time on this slide here. So at IBM, we're building the industry-leading platform to really bring us closer to to quantum advantage. And we see this happening in 4 steps. So the first step is to really improve quantum computing performance. So that's where we talk about the speed, the quality of our qubits, as well as the number of qubits and how we scale our systems. The second thing is, can you bring quantum computing to actual classical workflows? So that's actually, how are you meeting the end users where they are and providing value to relevant use cases that they need in industry? The third thing is also, can we develop the commercial ecosystem so that we actually have routes to market for startups, and we can actually build successful businesses on quantum? And then the fourth is, how do we think about scaling the broader community? So quantum needs to be evangelized. Quantum needs to see adoption. Quantum right now, it's still in its early stages, but to really achieve quantum advantage, we need to put quantum in the hands of a broader audience. Okay? So let me deep dive into each of these, first starting with quantum computing performance. So when we think of that, IBM really sees quantum computing performance in terms of 3 metrics. The first is the scale of the system. So that is the number of qubits. The second is actually thinking about the quality of the systems. So we have a metric, quantum volume, that tells you, that gives you an idea of how well you can execute algorithms on our quantum system. And the third key metric is actually speed. So that is the CLOPS metric that we're using to tell you, how fast you can actually go about these executions. And across each of these 3 metrics, IBM, we have set ourselves targets for where to end up in 2022. So in terms of the scale, by 2022, so this year, we should have 433 qubits. In terms of the quantum volume, so there's a 1024 quantum volume here. And then in terms of speed, we look to achieve 10,000 clops in 2022 as well. So we're setting a very ambitious roadmap for ourselves at IBM. And let me talk about the way that startups actually fit into this picture. So keep in mind these three key metrics: scale, quality, and speed. And when you think about startups that we work with in the program, so we are working with startups that are doing hardware research as well as they're doing research and development at the software layer of the stack. So we work with startups that are doing research into the quantum systems themselves. So startups that might be developing other types of qubits for their quantum system. Startups that are doing control systems. Those that are thinking about how do you apply interconnects to scale, as well as other componentries that are very important to really bring high performance to the hardware. And then in the other big bucket is actually the software perspective as well. So those are startups that are doing the algorithm research that they can use to build up applications and think about how is it that we can create algorithms that execute on some of the noisy hardware that are able to execute. You can actually do useful things at even lower circuit depth. The second thing is also startups that are doing software and thinking about the low-level systems controls. So how is it on a software perspective are you able to drive more performance from the quantum hardware? And then the third thing is thinking about some of the communications and network protocols that you will need in place as you think of scaling your quantum systems. And then the fourth is also thinking about how do you tie it all together, in terms of orchestrating across your quantum system and your classical systems as well, and resources to bring a integrated hybrid offering. So the second point that I want to talk about here is quantum applications and bringing those to classical workflows. Now, when you think about general areas in which the broader startup ecosystem is working on, from a application standpoint, three leading areas really emerge. So one is simulating nature and quantum systems. The second thing is looking at data with structure and doing artificial intelligence. And the third is thinking about optimization, and also for example, Monte Carlo simulations. And under each, essentially, these algorithms and these different areas of research, they can drive value to the end user, for whatever types of classical workflows they're doing today, by startups actually demonstrating proof of concepts in each of these that bring quantum algorithms as they exist today to the workflows of potential partners in industry. So for example, life sciences partners in finance, etc. So the idea is that the startups are pivotal because they really map these interesting problems to quantum circuits, and they're really developing these POCs with clients as it exists today. Now, how do we really then bridge the gap between POCs that startups are developing to actually helping startups to work and build products in a way that is scalable, in a way that they actually can integrate well with workflows of their clients, as well as really bring value to meet their clients where they are today. So here comes in Qiskit Runtime, which is IBM's quantum service. And the way that I want you to read this graph here, this slide here, is really to look at the right, where IBM is building our runtime architecture, and we're thinking about this in a modular way. And the first building block that we're doing is really establishing these Qiskit runtime primitives. So these have an estimator, sampler, and soon to come discriminator and integrator. And those are the building blocks that we expect our software partners to really call upon in order to access the quantum hardware and to really drive and really send jobs and really use our quantum systems. And then on top of that, in this layer here, we're going to have what's called the nested execution. So what we see is that someone who writes an algorithm, for example, could write a VQE, or we have startups as well writing their own third-party VQEs, algorithms, etc., and really building in this part of the layer and building on top of our stack. Now, these algorithm services, they actually feed into the other module of the stack, which is the applications. So, you can imagine, taking these algorithms and putting them into a chemical reaction search, for example, or some sort of molecular dynamics application. And then at the end of the day, you have, this application model services, and that really feeds into the product that's, whether it be a specific workflow product that is geared towards a company doing computer-aided drug design, or it could be something entirely different. It could be, for example, finance company wanting to do portfolio optimization. So by creating this platform, we hope to enable startups to really bring quantum to the end users and to really bring quantum to an external product that can reach the hands of many. So that being said, it seems very natural for us to think about the commercial ecosystem as well. And this is where startups actually, they do have a core and critical role to play for IBM. A lot of the development of the commercial system, it happens from the ground up, and really leveraging startups that are working in the local geographies. They also have established relationships with end users, etc. So, for example, we can think about this Japan ecosystem where we do have a strong presence of startups to support the local industry in, for example, in chemistry. So, what are the ways that we're thinking through the commercial ecosystem development? Well, there are actually three things that we are doing as IBM Quantum and in part of the startup program to do so. One is thinking about, okay, how do you accelerate research and development? So can you make sure that startups are successful if they're going to develop on the IBM Quantum stack and really help to accelerate that process for them? The second is thinking about partner-led development. So can we take end users and a startup and really have that type of commercial relationship where a use case is defining how do the startups develop their product and applications. And then the third thing is also thinking about commercial go-to-market. So with IBM, we want startups to be able to test the market demand, to really build apps on top of IBM Quantum, and to demonstrate value to the ecosystem through that relationship. And right now, as it stands today, we at IBM have approximately 4 ways in which you can interact with our quantum services. This is just a description of some of those plans. So the last thing I want to touch on is quite important. This is the just thinking about the broader community and outreach. So IBM established pretty early putting our quantum computers on the cloud, as well as thinking about the really launching this Qiskit community to drive adoption of quantum throughout the developers. And as you can see here, there's been a big growth in terms of the IBM Quantum Network research community. There's been a big growth in the developers and those being educated by the Qiskit, especially in the digital education. And what we get here is that we've seen, for example, lots of research papers being published by our clients as well as the broader community. In addition to that, the role that startups play is to, while we have the IBM Quantum Network, startups such as QCware and Qnasis, they're really organizing these conferences and trade shows. We also have startups that are giving talks and really evangelizing quantum throughout the ecosystem. So they're really playing a key role in terms of thinking about spreading the message of quantum throughout the other developers. So yes, we see growth in terms of what we're doing at IBM. Approximately, we have 3.1 million learners today through our digital channels. And the startups, we hope to can maintain this growth and even accelerate it as well. So in summary, I just want to say that there are 4 ways we envision startups accelerating our path to quantum advantage today. One is they're improving the quantum computing performance. Second thing is that they're bringing quantum applications in classical workflows. Third, they're developing the commercial ecosystem. And fourth is really scaling the broader community. So with that being said, I just want to just lay out here that at IBM we do have a quantum starter program. If you need to know anything about it, please try to find me in the conference, and I'll be happy to walk through what we're doing with startups, as well as how to get involved in the startup program. All right. So with that being said, I would really like to thank the host of Q2B. Thank you for your time, everyone, and the sponsors, as well as the fellow speakers. Thank you.